Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the voice of college football, more specifically, the Mountaineer locker room then and now. New show we're bringing to you. We hope that you guys will enjoy this. I'm Greg Christ. I'll be your host for this show. I'll be joined here in just a moment by my co-host, Frank Fear. We wanted to introduce ourselves to you and let you know what our show is going to be about. We're going to be covering, of course, WVU Mountaineer athletics, mainly football. And the then and now part of it, we're also going to try and reflect on past history of WVU and how that relates. You know, everything that happens in WVU sports, there's a history, there's a story, a backstory, and then there's history that goes along with that. So what we're going to try to do is bring guests on that can reflect on that past history and relate it to current times. So that's what we're going to try to do. And we're going to get on and discuss all the relevant topics, all the hot news of the day, and try to keep you updated on that, give you our opinions. And on the show, there's the capability, and Frank will be putting it up on the screen here in just a little bit, for viewers to join in on the conversation. And you can send comments in. Later on, you'll be able to actually join us on the show. And I think that'll be a lot of fun as well. So if you disagree with us, you don't have to get on here and fuss at us. You just get on and give your own opinions of how things go. As I said earlier, my co-host is Mr. Frank Fear. A lot of you may know Frank. Frank, of course, wrote the book, Band of Brothers Then and Now. And he has produced this book with the information about the 69 Peach Bowl champions and then the 70, 68, 69, 70 Mountaineers, that era of Mountaineers. We're going to have a couple of those fellows on tonight talking about the 69 Peach Bowl, which should be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that. So, Frank, if you want to come on in and join us now and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what we got going on here with our show.
Well, thanks, Greg. This is an exciting night for all of us, and I want to thank all of you for watching both live and archived. It's just we all love WVU and WVU athletics. There's a big basketball game tonight against Pitt at 9 o'clock. For those who are watching live, we'll be done by then. But it's always great working with Greg. I've been on a show a number of times, always enjoyed it. If you don't know Greg, you'll get to know him here, but I'm sure many of you do. We're just we've got we'll have great guests. There's no question about that. And it's going to be a lot of fun. We'll be on every Wednesday night at 7 o'clock right here on the Voice of College Football. Not only the WV Voice of College Football, but also a new channel on the network, the Big 12 Network. And Joey Foster, who manages the network, the West Virginia Network, and now the Big 12, does a great job. And we appreciate everything he does. You can see a message from Joey there. And there are a lot of things going on. Here's one from Kenny Evans, and we'll talk about this later. Any news about the ACC teams contacting Big 12? There's when we thought, hey, all this stuff had settled down after the Pac-12 dissolved, it's still going on. So it's great. So I'll kick it back to you, Craig.
All right, and again, like Frank said, and like I said earlier, we're going to discuss numerous topics tonight, as much as time will allow us to discuss. We're going to talk about first on the agenda, of course, is this college football playoff committee and the selections that they made. There's been nothing but controversy around that, and people from all walks have their opinions about that. And we're going to express our opinions tonight about that as well. And like I said earlier, also we're going to talk about the 69 Peach Bowl. And we have a couple of gentlemen joining us tonight from that time period and from that team. And you guys, I'm sure, have seen these guys around. Of course, Mickey Plumley, who played on that 69 team, as well as my good friend Charlie Fisher. Both these guys participated on that squad, and these guys are awesome. I've gotten to know them over the past year and a half, 2 years, and they have been a real pleasure for me to get to know. And they're very knowledgeable. They're true blue Mountaineers, and they have a lot of good information to share with us tonight. Again, the first topic we wanted to talk about tonight is this college football playoff selection committee and what they did over the weekend. Again, nothing but controversy and talk about that. And I'll go first on that and give my my minuscule opinion about it, and then we'll pass it on and let everybody else talk a little bit about it. But my feelings, and I know I'm going to catch grief for this, are that Florida State got hosed. Period. They did everything they were supposed to do. They went undefeated. They won their conference, and I hear this talk about, well, they lost their quarterback. They're not the same team, et cetera, et cetera. Well, they did lose their quarterback. They lost both their backup, who went down to their third string quarterback, and they still won their conference championship, which to me is pretty impressive. Says a great deal about their defense. I would also add to that when I hear that comment, and that is, this bowl game is still, a month away. How can this committee determine that Florida State's backup quarterback is not going to turn out to be as good as their starting? He may be better. Or was to say that the starting quarterback miraculously comes back. You don't know. You can't predict what's going to happen right there. And to say, well, they're not the same team, so they don't deserve to be there. If you look back at Alabama and some of the games that they won, they squeaked by a couple of teams that were not real good. UFC, I think, was the team. Then they beat Auburn on a miracle. So I can't go with this argument that they're not as good. They didn't play a tough schedule, et cetera, et cetera. They also say they want to take the best teams, the 4 best teams. So if that is the case, then Georgia should be there, and probably Ohio State. So just every year, go ahead and have Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama every year, because that's your 4 best teams, and that usually is your 4 best teams. So I disagree with the fact that if they're going to say they're taking the 4 best teams, I don't think they did that either. So I have a lot of problems with the way this thing folded out, but I don't blame the committee so much as I blame the system. I think the system is terribly flawed, and I think you're always going to have these problems as long as you have a system like that. Frank, I'll turn it over to you and let you throw your 2 cents in there.
Well, you can see Kelly McCourt agrees with you there, Greg, in terms of, but let me put it this way. One of the challenges, I think, from the very beginning, ever since we moved to the BCS, is that you've got this committee around a table, okay? And they made a decision, NCAA, college football playoff committee, really, that there would only be 4 teams. Well, it's only a matter of time before you're going to drive that car right into the ditch. There were at least eight really good teams this year, and it's amazing that the 2 teams that traded number 1, Georgia and Ohio State, neither one, is in the college football playoff. If it's next year, it's going to be 8, and if we had 8 this time, we wouldn't be having any controversy, because those teams, the 4 teams, Florida State, Oregon, et cetera, Georgia, would be in it. And so now here's the deal. Another problem is when you have a committee and you're formal and disciplined, you have criteria. And politics aside, you have to follow those criteria. One criterion was that significant injury or injuries that affect competition significantly would be taken into consideration, and it was. As one person said the other day, I think it was on ESPN, Florida State's offense in the last 2 games looked like it was on neutral. And so in the end, having only 4 slots, but then you get the politics of it. The SEC holds sway. Alabama made a big leap up, but again, they beat the number 1 team in Georgia, and so it's tough. So I guess I look at it, Greg. It's 6 1/2 of the other. They applied the criteria, and a group enough of the people on that committee agreed that Florida State was out. But I think its cost is significant. This may be the precipitating event, the event that leads to teams leaving the ACC, and we'll talk more about that later.
Yeah. Yep, I agree. And the thing is, I have my opinion about it, but I also can understand the other arguments. That's the thing about it. In my time as a magistrate, I had a lot of cases where both sides were right. And I had to determine who was most right. And that's a hard thing to do. So, I can see arguments from all sides. I just have a really hard time, with, seeing Georgia, for example, they dropped from 1 to 6. You're telling me Georgia's the 6th best team in the country? Come on, there's no way. And then Alabama goes from 8 up to 4, and I just don't understand some of it, and I think it's hard for those guys to predict the future, and I don't think that they can predict the future. And I don't care if Florida State's a 50-point underdog according to the spread. Those guys don't know what that team's going to be like in January, when they play. Granted, they struggled offensively, but, Alabama struggled offensively early in the season until they got a quarterback lined out, So who knows what's going to happen? And I know Mickey, living down there in Georgia, he has some pretty strong feelings about this as well. Mickey, let it go, man.
Hey, well, thanks, Greg. I'm not going to comment on Georgia's not being selected to play. I mean, they did lose the game. I want to go deeper than that. I want to talk about the concept of even having a selection committee. And in doing so, I want to, the selection committee was created back in 2013. So it's been going on for 10 years now. And just about every year, there's been controversy on who got in, who didn't get in. I want to revert back to some comments that the late, great Mike Leach had to say in 2017 when he was head coach at Washington State, and they did not make it in. And as he described it, it was the very concept of a committee is a mind-numbing, short-sighted notion that people, some of which don't even have an association with college football other than being a fan, the very concept that a group of people like that should be put together as a committee to decide who gets in and who doesn't get in is ludicrous. And in a parody, he described it. He said, "Oh yeah, it's such a great idea to have a committee. Look how many other sports do it. Nobody else. Basketball, baseball, soccer, nobody else at NCAA level has a committee making a decision on who gets in and who doesn't get in." And in Florida State's case, because we have a committee, quote unquote, a conference champion can easily be left out of the selection process. So, who gets on the committee? Well, let's choose so-and-so. He's a pretty good guy. So, let's have him there. And, we need some female representation. So, let's have a political representative on the committee also. So it's basically a committee of people. They're chosen at random by Lord only knows whom. And what do? They say, well, let's go to a resort and let's spend a weekend and let's have, some nice dinners and some nice wine and let's decide who gets in and who gets out. Well, okay, if we're going to do it that way, why don't they just choose the 4 teams in September and not even play the season at all? I think Mike had some very good comments on this subject. I think the committee, quite frankly, should be done away with completely.
Mickey, we were talking earlier, Frank and I know you guys have talked about it too. Can you imagine the NFL having a committee to decide who gets in their playoffs and their Super Bowl?
I cannot. And no other sport does it. I mean, it's a ludicrous proposition in the first place, in my opinion. Okay. I mean, because most of these people have no association with football other than being a fan. And, it leaves the possibility of proving your worth on the field out of the picture completely. Yeah. I think it detracts from the athleticism. It detracts from the competitiveness. It detracts from the ethical value of the sport itself by doing it this way. Those are just my own personal opinion on it.
Right. And yeah, and I agree with that. And you know, the thing about these committee folks, and I'm sure they're all perfectly good, honest folks.
Oh yeah.
They're still human beings, you know, and everybody has their biases, whether they want to admit it or not. They do. And when you get in there and you start talking about, you know, this team and that team, you know, there's people in that room that have a different bias. Everybody has different bias. So, you know, there's going to be some of that human element, obviously, that plays into it. And like you said, why play the games? If it's going to come down to these folks' opinion, then why play the games? You know, another thing that drives me crazy too is listening to these folks. And I was going to say talking heads, but I guess that's what we're doing here on ESPN. And they'll sit there and they'll make an argument. You know, they'll make an argument against Florida State being in. Before they get finished talking, they're making an argument for Alabama to be in, and they're using the same argument. You know, strength of schedule, or they squeak by in a close game against a lesser opponent. And then they'll say, you know, Alabama beat everybody on their schedule, you know, and they lost to Texas early in the season. So they come up with the reasons, you know, they make their argument and then try to come up with something to back it up instead of having the facts and everything laid out to them, then making their argument based on that. They make it up as they go. So they got contradictory arguments. You know, the arguments for one team is different than the arguments for another team. And I know that was really confusing, but I think most of you know what I'm talking about when you start listening to them and they argue these things. It's frustrating to listen to them. People listen.
Charlie, what are your thoughts on this subject, Mr. Fisher?
Well, hey guys, it's really good to be with all of you again, and to our fans that are here, thank you for tuning in and sending your words and your comments in. I'm going to say one thing about Florida State, and nobody actually brought it up. Florida State going into the 12th game of the season against the University of Florida. Second team quarterback, played most of that game, got hurt, went out for a series, came back in and finished the game. After the 12th game, which they won, the committee voted them in the top 4 teams in the country with a second string quarterback winning the game.
Yep.
But they play the 13th game, the championship game. They win the game with the third string quarterback, the second string quarterback who will be back for that game, and they weren't good enough to be ranked number 4. There was just no rhyme or reason. And I think I kind of agree with what everybody's saying, but, you know, I'm just going to be a little bit more cynical. And it came down to what I thought originally would be Michigan, Washington, and Florida State. And we had one position to fill. And I think everybody thought that the 2 teams would be Texas and Alabama if Alabama won, which they did. But what our committee chose was Washington and Michigan, threw Florida State under the bus, and took Texas and Alabama. And to me, it all came down to the money. Because the 2 teams that are going to bring more money, more fans into that mix, more people watch the games, were going to be Texas and an SEC team. And irregardless, it was going to be, if it had been Washington, Michigan, and Florida State, that 4th team would have been an SEC team, because that's what that committee, ESPN, and the powers that be in the TV networks, that's who they wanted, was the SEC. That's a little bit of my thoughts on it, but I think Florida State kind of got thrown under the bus, and I hate to see that. And I don't know, you talk about no committee. How do you do it? Mm-hmm. Do you have a computer and you feed all of it in and then the computer do it?
Well, we had I had a system like a few years back ago, and it worked that way. And maybe that is the way to go. I don't know. And I saw a comment there about WVU having a backup quarterback come in by the name of Pat White. Who knows? Florida State don't have one of those right there. You don't know. Okay, we need to. Any final thoughts here, real quick, before we move on to our next topic? Frank, you good?
Totally. Good discussion. Thanks, guys.
All right. Of course, we found out Sunday or maybe early Monday morning that WVU will be heading to a bowl game, and it's the Duke's Mayo Bowl. And I think looking back, and I don't remember all of them, but I know at one time it was the Meineke Bowl. Meineke Car Care, then the CarQuest, I think, was one. Maybe the Belk Bowl was the name of it. So it's been a bowl. I think it's been a bowl for about 21, 22 years. And I think it surprised a lot of folks that West Virginia ended up in this bowl. Most of the talk that we had leading up to it and the research that we had done led us to believe it was going to be the Liberty Bowl probably, or the Armed Forces Bowl, maybe the Independence Bowl. It has going all over the place. This one kind of came out of the blue, but there was a reason for that. There's a reason why the Duke's Mayo Bowl turned up. And I think, for our purposes, I think it's great. It's close by for WVU fans. I think it's going to be it's a good opponent. It's not going to be a bowl where people look at it and say, those are two bad teams or whatever. We have a good opponent in North Carolina, and I think it's pays out pretty well. It's about $5 million, $4.7 million. It pays out, so it's good money. And again, nice close bowl, nice stadium. I think the Charlotte alumni group is probably the biggest one in the country, I'm guessing, for WVU. I don't know that for sure, but I've heard that. You guys that are alumni may know better than I do, but I've heard that is the biggest chapter in the country. So we should have a good turnout, good fan turnout. The tickets, from what I understand, a lot of the WVU side is already sold. And so it sounds like we're going to have a good turnout for that. So I think this is a good reward for a good season, and I think it's going to be a good bowl game, and I'm looking forward to it. Frank, what do you think?
Well, you and I talked about this earlier. I've done some research on the team, and you can see it here. These are two teams that are going in different directions. West Virginia obviously picked up steam as the season went on, and you'll see in the second bullet point there, North Carolina started 6-0, but then went 2-4 to end the season. And they lost to teams that I didn't think they would lose to. Georgia Tech, Virginia are 2. They beat Duke by 2, and they beat an FCS team. And what's interesting in the first bullet there is that WVU actually is favored. I checked out today that the Big 12 teams, all but 2 Big 12 teams, at least for now, are favored in their games. The teams that aren't favored, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, neither is favored in their respective bowl. But the ESPN matchup predictor has UNC 60% chance of winning. Now, the big question is in that third bullet point. And I checked again today. He is uncommittal, the he being Drake May. The guy is a tremendous quarterback, if you've seen him play. Quarterback rating of 149 this year, 63% completion rate, 3,600 yards, 24 touchdowns, only 9 interceptions. And they have 5 quarterbacks on the roster, but only one other person has played at all, Connor Harrell. And so he's only thrown for 71 yards. I think he was in 2 games. They have a really good running back in Hampton. They have really good receivers, as you can see in Nesbitt and Walker. I was mentioning to the guys before the show, and you'll see it at the bottom. It blew me away. The last bullet point there, they are number 4 in the country in terms of their offense. And they're 7 yards a play they're averaging. But look at their defense is ranked 95th. And so without May, he's the straw that stirs the drink. It's going to be a problem. They got a great field goal kicker too. He's only missed 1 this year. Burnett. They have a solid defense too. I didn't realize, I'm sure other fans did, that Gene Chizik, late of Auburn and Iowa State head coach, is the assistant head coach for defense, they call it, and they have 2 defensive co-coordinators. I've never heard of that before. So I don't know. I think it's going to be a good game. I think it's one of the best games that the Big 12 has this year, and so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I think what you said, Drake May, is the key. I think if he don't play, our chances go up exponentially, and it could be good for us. But I've heard a lot of rumors that he's not going to play. But again, it's all talk right now, so who knows for sure? I guess we'll find out in the near future. Mickey, what do you think?
I think it's going to be a great matchup, and I think it's going to be, if you're looking to the over/under, probably more than 60, 65 points scored. I mean, North Carolina's got a great offense. I think they've been averaging like 7 yards per play all season long. They certainly started off strong, winning 6 games in a row, and then they got unexpectedly upset by UVA. And it's been a little downhill for them, since then, up and down. So I think when it comes, to bowl games, you have to have your team peak at the right time. And I think that Coach Brown's got the Mountaineers peaking at the right time to come out on the winning side of this game. It's a great game for the fans, no doubt about it. I mean, that stadium is a great venue to play in. It's an easy commute for most West Virginians. Got to be a sellout. I mean, basically, it's a home game for North Carolina, if you will. But I think so far, when you look at ticket sales, West Virginia ticket sales have outsold North Carolina sales. I know at least in the lower level sections they have. And it's affordable for West Virginians and for North Carolinians. I think the average ticket price is like $75. So, it's great exposure. I like the time of the game, 5:30 in the afternoon on the 27th, instead of us getting chosen for a West Coast bowl game where we'd be on at 10:15, 10:30 at night. So, I look for a high scoring offensive game from both teams. And I think it'll be one of those where, the team that scores last will win. Got to give credit to Mike Brown, who's been around forever. I remember when he coached at University of Texas, and, he's a great coach. There's some similarities actually between this bowl game and the Peach Bowl that we're going to talk about later, back in 1969, and that, Neil Brown's in his 5th year at West Virginia against a seasoned coach that's been around for a long, long time. Back in 69, Jim Carlin, in his 3rd year at WVU, up against Paul Dietzel at South Carolina, who'd been around for a long time. So from that perspective, I think there's some parallels that can be drawn as well. But I look for a close contest. I think whoever scores last wins.
Yeah, and I think we look at Mountaineer defense. Hopefully they can get back to where they were there a few times during the season. If our defense can step up like it did a few games, then I think we can win this game, handily if our defense plays. Now, our defense has had a tendency at times to not show up. And if that happens, then I agree with you, Mickey. I think it'll be a high-scoring affair, and we'll see. But West Virginia is 3.5-point favorites as of now. So we'll see how that goes. So put your money on them. Charlie, what do you think?
I'm looking forward to it. And like Mickey said, everybody said it's a close to home, so it's great for our fans. I guess we kind of owe a little bit of a thanks to the SEC for not having enough teams to qualify for bowls, and that's how we got into it. So I think that's a thank you to the SEC, because that's much better, in my estimation, than the Liberty Bowl or some of the other bowls that we were thinking about going into. You never know what we might get with the second-team quarterback. We've been talking about that with Florida State. So, May is the straw that stirs the drink. I like that. And but I think it'll be a good game. And like most of our games, I think it's going to be one in the trenches. on the offensive and defensive lines. And, our offensive line has been very, very good all year. And our defensive line has had their moments of being brilliant and great, but they've had their down times. But if we play a good game in the trenches, I think it's going to be ours. I really do.
Had the opportunity to go down to that, I think it was the CarQuest Bowl when I went down to Charlotte and watched the Mountaineers play. And it was a great experience for people that are thinking about going. You should go and support the Mountaineers. You'll have a great time down there. It's a wonderful facility. It's easy to get to, plenty of places, nice places to stay. It's really a nice location for a bowl game, and I think people should take advantage. And I agree, Charlie. The lines, offensive and defensive lines, obviously are going to play the pivotal role. You worry a little bit about ours with the loss of Zach Frazier. That's a huge loss for us. But fortunately, we have this month to prepare. And, the kid that came in and backed up the other night did a pretty good job. I watched him, and he played well. So but hopefully that'll keep our offensive line together and playing well like they have all year. I read a statistic on WVU with the last, I think, 16 games. We have rushed for over 140 yards in the last 16 games. And I think if we continue to do that, control the ball, that says a lot about our offensive line, our running backs, our quarterback now. I think we should be able to win. I think it's going to be fun to watch, and I'm looking forward to it. I know you guys are as well. Now, speaking of bowl games, and we got you guys on here to talk about this a little bit, and I'll let you all go first on this. You guys were both members of the 1969 Peach Bowl champions, and we talked about some parallels of the game that we're going to have this year with the game that you guys played back in 1969. I need to throw this out there. I was 8 years old, so I don't remember a lot about it. I want to make sure I got that in there. So, but anyway, we're tickled to have you guys here to talk about this, and I have read a lot about it. And it's been fascinating to read about in Frank's book, and you guys put on a heck of a show down there. And I know great memories for you guys. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the parallels with our bowl games now and back then. Mickey, we'll let you go first. Let's hear about that '69 Peach Bowl.
Thank you, Greg. I played on the offensive line, and Charlie played on the defensive line. So I'll address the offensive aspect of that game, and perhaps Charlie can talk about the defensive aspects, because the defense did one heck of a job holding them to a singular field goal in that contest. But on the offensive side, the genius of Bobby Bowden really came into play, because once we beat Syracuse, we weren't sure whether we were going to go to a bowl game or not. And let me back up just a minute and say, back in the day, the Peach Bowl was in its second year. We played in the second annual one, and there were only nine bowl games back then. So, I mean, today there must be somewhere between 35 and 45, I would guess. But it was a real honor to be chosen to go to a bowl game. And I remember reading our head coach, Jim Carlin. He had ties back in Atlanta because he had played at Georgia Tech. He had been an assistant coach. He knew Bobby Dodd personally. And I think perhaps he had utilized some of his contacts to influence people to make the selection after we beat Syracuse and finished the regular season, 9-1. The only game that we lost that senior year getting to the Peach Bowl was to our old nemesis, Penn State. And one thing I like to point out to people, even though we lost to them 20-0, during 1968, 1969, Penn State went 22-0. They didn't lose a single game in 2 years. And they put 17 players into the NFL from that 68 and 69 team. So, no shame in losing to those guys. Certainly we, played our best with them. Unfortunately, Oscar Patrick, one of our big offensive weapons, went down in pregame warmups. Otherwise, things could have been differently. But in any event, we did get the bowl bid. And I wanted to talk about, before I get into the actual game itself, Greg, a little bit behind the scenes, since we're calling this the Mountaineer locker room. some of the things that people may not associate with bowl games. I mean, if you're a player, it's a reward more than anything else for having done so well throughout the season, to have the honor to go represent your state in a bowl game somewhere. And Coach Carlin and Coach Bowden, I think both took the tack that, hey, we're going to practice hard for this game. We're going to be prepared, but we're going to go down there and have some fun as well. I mean, there are a lot of bowl activities that go on that the general public doesn't see leading up to the game itself. For example, we had a luncheon one day with the South Carolina team and the West Virginia team, both in attendance, where they presented us with our Peach Bowl watches. We all got a Peach Bowl watch for participating in the game. And those were presented to us by the Peach Bowl Queen. And she was honored in the parade 2 days before the game. One of the interesting things that happened during that watch presentation ceremony, I'll never forget, is that was the days of school integration was just beginning, and we had quite a few black players on our team. And when Carl Cornell, our middle linebacker, went up to accept his Peach Bowl watch from the Peach Bowl Queen, he gave her a kiss on the cheek. And that just about brought the crowd to their feet. Some applauding, some not. But you go through experiences like that. We had some good time. Charlie and some of his defensive teammates were filmed in a Peach Bowl highlight that is currently on YouTube. If any of the viewers want to go watch it, just go type in 1969 Peach Bowl. You can take a look at it, and you'll see what happened. There's several things that I recall. We all got to go home before Christmas for a few days, and then we had to go back to Morgantown the day after Christmas. We actually practiced outside in the snow for 2 days before we caught the flight to head down to Atlanta. I was particularly happy that we were going to Atlanta to play in the Peach Bowl because my college roommate was from Decatur, Georgia, which is right outside of Atlanta, and he knew the city like the back of his hand. And we did have a little leeway, not a lot, but room checks weren't as forcibly enforced as they had been during the season. You were expected to be back in your room at a certain hour, but we had a great time bonding together, being in the South, playing against a team that we knew very little about. And the last thing I'll recall is after the game, and I'll get into the game itself, but after the game, the one thing that I'll remember most of all from a locker room perspective is we finished the game about 10 o'clock at night, and the flight back to Morgantown was at 8:30 a.m. the next morning. Well, at the time, Atlanta had a very popular social venue called Underground Atlanta. It was the old city that existed before Sherman did his march through the South and burned it down. And it had been built into quite a maze of restaurants, bars, and entertainment venues. So when we finished the game, we took our showers and all got dressed up. Coach Carlin addressed us. He told us he was leaving to go to South Carolina. And he said, Underground Atlanta is right around the corner. The plane leaves at 8:30 tomorrow morning. I expect you to be on the plane. That is probably the only time we got any leeway. But you go through experiences like that in a bowl game, which you have a lot of fun in addition to going and being as competitive as you can. And from that perspective, from an offensive perspective, kudos to Bobby Bowden, because a lot of people know this, a lot don't. We had run the I formation for 3 years. When we got the bowl bid, Bobby Bowden decided to put in a new offense. He called Darrell Royal at Texas and went down and saw him. He came back, called the offensive team meeting together, and he said, "Men, we're going to put in the wishbone offense, and we're going to run it, what some people call the veer offense, and we're going to run it." And South Carolina had no idea what hit them. as a result of that. And it's a good thing we did too, because we had great weather in Atlanta the 3 or 4 days we were there, except for the night of the game. About 30 minutes before kickoff, it just poured buckets. And if you watch that highlight film on YouTube, you'll see. I mean, it just came. It was a torrential downpour. It was a mud bowl more than anything else. So it was a good thing that we had put in basically a running attack, because passing attack wouldn't have worked very well that night. And I'll just close with this about that game. We still hold 5 or 6 records, which are now the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl records from that game. Putting in the wishbone, you know, we had Jim Braxton and Bob Gresham as our mainstay running backs, Brax being the blocking back and Gresh being the tailback. But when we put the wishbone in, we highlighted a fellow by the name of Eddie Williams, who South Carolina had not prepared for. They had no idea who he was. Well, Eddie set the ground rushing record that night, 208 yards on the ground. We set the team rushing record that night that still stands, 376 yards we gained on the ground that night. We set the record for most running plays in a Peach Bowl, 77. And we set 3 more records that our quarterback, Mike Sherwood, may not be too proud of, but just the way the game played out, we still hold the record for the fewest passes attempted in a Peach Bowl, 2, and the fewest passes completed in a Peach Bowl, 1, and the fewest passing yards in a Peach Bowl, 7. So we got several records that still sound there. But it was a great opportunity to go down there. It was a great opportunity for us to be, at that point in time, only the 4th team in WVU history to go 10-1, to win 10 ball games in a season. So, yeah, great times, times I'll never forget. And I'll finish with this. You know, as a senior, it was very troubling times too, because most of us, except for guys like Dale Farley and Jim Braxton and Bob Gresham, you know, those guys were going on to the NFL. But most of us knew it would be the very last time we would don the pads and play a college football game. Now, Charlie was a junior, so he had a year of playing coming up. But I'll never forget the anxiety I felt prior to kickoff, thinking this is the last game I'm ever going to play in. And then you leave it all on the field when you go out and play in that sort of environment. Great experience. Glad I was fortunate enough to have it. Thank God every day for the blessing of being involved with a team like that, with people like Charlie and my other teammates, and particularly having a coach like Coach Bowden, who had such a huge impact, not only on my life, but so many young men that he coached during his career.
Fantastic. Appreciate all that. That's I think folks listening tonight can get an idea of why this has been so fun for me to hear these stories and hear these guys talk about their experience. Just awesome information. And, you know, credit to that offensive line, Mick. You guys, like you said, 370 some yards rushing. Eddie Williams had 208 yards of that on 35 carries. And if you watch the, like you said, the highlight video on YouTube, y'all were just gashing them, you know, and it's fun to watch. So people need to go check that out as well. And of course, like you said, the defense did an outstanding job. So we're going to get Charlie on here talking a little bit about his experience down there. And again, that role that the defense played in it was awesome as well. So Charlie, let's hear your side of the story.
Well, before I get there, for the talking of that highlight film, if you do take the time to watch it, and of course the highlight films always go, in this case, to 75% of the highlight film is the offense.
Right.
But what I want to point out to anybody that takes the time to watch it, we had some great running backs, but if you would look at the holes that the offensive line made throughout that whole film in all 11 games, I was pretty quick, but I could have made those holes and scored a lot of touchdowns because the offensive line the offensive line was really, really good, and they did a phenomenal job. The weather, what can you say? It, as Mickey touched on it, it just literally poured. A little pre-game thing. We were out warming up, and we had been out there, I don't know, a minute, and South Carolina came out. And I think it was Coach Buckley, who was the defensive line coach. He said, look at South Carolina. He said, they're looking for dry spots to get into. He said, you guys have already got these guys beat because they didn't want to get muddy. From the get-go, they didn't want to get muddy. And I wished I had some pictures, and they were on my phone, but I was going to show some pictures from that night. One specific picture of Mike Sherwood and Dickie Roberts. And you couldn't see the numbers on their uniforms. Dickie's hosing. He's got a hose and hosing off Mike Sherwood. Another great thing, our governor, Governor Arch Moore, he wasn't up in the press box. Arch Moore was on the sidelines that whole game. And if we came off the field, hosed off, he's sitting there drying us off and wiping us down, the offense and the defense, the whole game. So that was it was a state thing. It was a state thing. And the thrill and the excitement. I mean, from a personal thing, I got up for every game. And I wasn't up any more for that game than I was for Richmond. It was a game, and you were up. You were up. But it was special. It was extremely special. Another strange thing for me was I had to sit there and eat a dinner with the guys that I was playing across from. Now, I don't know how that worked out. But, there was Cornell and Henshaw and I, and we sat with the other offensive linemen that we played against that night. And they were good guys, but it made for, a strange evening, a really, really strange evening.
Right.
But it was, I think now if we were playing now, hell, I'd be in 3 bowl games. I'd have gotten 3 bowl games in. Because we were 7-3, 10-1, and 8-3. So I would have had 3 watches or 3 rings, any way you look at it.
That's right.
But
yes, a little different era now, isn't it?
it certainly is. But that whole thing, like Mickey said, there's not much I can add to it. It's been a highlight. It's something that people still come up to me and ask me about that game. The only other game is the Pitt game in 1970, and but I had more people talk to me about the Peach Bowl, and it was just a great experience. And my relationship with Coach Bowden, it kind of just cemented him. His greatness that came after that, most deserving. The other thing, you talk about the wishbone, the veer being for a dry field or a wet field. And a lot of people felt Coach Carlin had an in with God. And after that game, they were convinced that he did.
Got that
they
ring.
were convinced that he did. But anyway, Frank, Coach, Mick, it's just been wonderful. And it's anytime we can talk about these things, I'd love to share them. And Frank, again, thank you for your book, bud.
Well, I was going to say, guys, I look at it from obviously a fan perspective. If I had played football, I would have played left out, but I didn't. Yeah, so, I'm talking to the fans watching tonight and those who will be watching in the archive version. Most of us are just we're fans in the stands watching. Yeah. And actually that 69 season was my introduction to West Virginia football, and what a year it was. How many? I mean, there were eventually 3 Hall of Fame coaches on the staff that was in 69 and 70 at West Virginia, 3 college Hall of Fame coaches. And so I look at it from this point, what a blessing it is for me to get to know folks like Charlie and Mickey and all the other guys, have a chance to interview them and write a book, to, as a fan, to hear the stories, which you're hearing tonight, to relive those stories. Really, you can't relive them, but they're reliving them. But you're living it through them. And as a fan, what's better than that? And I know that, Greg, you feel exactly the same way. So that's one of the things we want to do on this show is not just talk about what's going on in WVU sports now, plenty of good stuff, but every single topic, we can link it back to what happened before and what happened in history. And as a couple of the viewers said, I either wasn't born, Kelly said I wasn't born then. I think that's what he said. Somebody else says I was 5. But that's our history. That's not just Mickey and Charlie's history. It's WVU history.
Right.
And, West Virginia has not made a history of going to bowl games. That's why there's so much enthusiasm for the game coming up at the end of this month against North Carolina. But we have to remember that South Carolina won the Atlantic Coast Conference that year. And there's no question Charlie's right. I heard this from more than one person. The game was won when the teams hit the field. West Virginia wanted to win that game and went out in a slop to win it.
Yep. I didn't mean to open up that can of worms about people's ages. So for you old guys, I apologize for that. But yeah, Frank, you're right. And you had the pleasure of interviewing all these guys, and I've got to listen to most of those interviews. It's been a blast. But to read your book, it's almost like sitting here listening to these stories from these guys, especially after you get to know them. You start reading that book, and it's just, those stories are there, and it's just so captivating. And I've read the book twice, and I love reading it. And those guys, their contributions to WVU and to society in general have just been wonderful, and it's so exciting. To get to be a part of it and get to listen to them and hear these stories. I know a lot of people will enjoy hearing Mickey and Charlie's stories tonight because, like you said, it gives you a little different perspective, like we are fans, but those guys were there and they were in the locker room and they were on the field and all these things happened that we know nothing about. So to hear those things really makes it exciting for us. And we look forward to a lot more of this. This is going to be a lot of fun to have these guys on. And we'd love to keep talking about this. I can sit and listen to these stories all night. We are drawing near to time though. So we want to go ahead and get our last topic in before we sign off for the night. And it's kind of now after listening to those things, to me, kind of a bummer topic, but we'll go ahead and get it anyway. We're going to talk about a little bit about the transfer portal. I had heard about a week ago that for some reason, and I don't remember the exact reason, but that this transfer portal season was going to be absolutely crazy. And I think from what we have seen already, those predictions were correct, and because it's already gotten crazy. And and just today, they talked about a new idea that the NCAA has all of a sudden come up with this new idea about how to pay players and the NIL and how to how to make the universities pay and then require them to dedicate money to educational programs and all that. So they're already grasping at some things, to get the horse back in the barn, as they say. The portal, and whether you like it or not, it's here and it's going to be here. I did see an interesting article today. I was reading about the money story, and it talked about how this has become the most important part of the season for most teams, and that is when you start finding out who you're losing, who you're going to be able to draw in, and those sorts of things where you're going to be able to get your help from. And I think we talked last week about Neil Brown and how I feel like his coaching progression has been positive. It's on the upswing. He's gotten better and better and better at it. And I said one of the things I feel like he's gotten better at is the transfer portal. What type of players we need in order to compete in the Big 12, where we need the help on our team specifically. And I think he's gotten better at that because he's brought in some awful good ones. And we can talk about, not been a whole lot of action yet on the WVU end. We all got our fingers crossed in hopes that, we're not going to lose a bunch of our key players. And I think everybody knows, Garrett Green has already said he will definitely be back no matter what. But I think everybody's worried about, our running backs, Donaldson, and of course, Raheem White. I think there's going to be some people knocking on Raheem White's door, so to speak. And, CJ Donaldson, of course, he got injured and kind of was relegated to the backup running back or the second running back in. I don't consider it a backup, but, he came in after White, and White really had a good showing the last couple of games, and he's an electrifying running back. So I'm sure, playing time may be an issue for him. So I think we all got our fingers crossed that we're going to be able to hold on to our players. But Frank, as well as I do, money talks to these guys. You can't blame these players. And if people come, carrying a bag of money, it's going to be hard to keep some of them. And but I think that's just the nature of the game right now.
Well, yeah, Greg, you're absolutely correct. I think that one of the things that we have to consider is that we always say, wow, West Virginia, how are we going to compete against these other schools? Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, and this is in the press, there was Ohio State primed to go to the college football playoff. Their quarterback and a number of others are in the portal. And it's a group of, I think, only 1 or 2 3-stars. They're 4 stars and 5 stars. Yeah. And so West Virginia has done a good job. Several wide receivers have gone into the portal, but they're not starters. Polk is one. Jeremiah Aaron is another. Cortez Braham Jr. They've gone into all 3 have gone into the portal. West Virginia, I looked at, as you did, Greg, a variety of different sources, and the consensus is that the needs are at the secondaries. Number 1, wide receiver and linebacker is also needed. And so the bottom line is that if you read the article today about the guys that said we're back in, except for Garrett Green, the Country Roads Trust is playing a major role. Yep. So it is. And again, for the fans, if you haven't read about it, I certainly recommend. It's all over ESPN. Proposal put together by the NCAA president on the proposal. It's coming from the president's office that schools now would be the source of funds for players. Right now, schools are not paying players directly. They're going through these cooperatives like the Country Road Trust that have a dash line relationship with the university. But the proposal the NCAA has put forward is that the money would come directly from the school to at least a minimum of 50% of all the athletes in the athletic program at the school, and it has to be a minimum of $30,000. And so we're going to see where that's going to go. But what that would do, if it became a fact, would go a long way toward leveling the playing field, because right now it's not possible. It's just not possible for schools like West Virginia to keep up with Ohio State, Michigan, and the Texas schools, particularly Texas A&M and Texas. So for schools like West Virginia to keep up with Ohio State, Michigan, and the Texas schools, particularly Texas A&M and Texas.
I'm gonna get a little feedback here.
But somebody got your phone on.
Yeah.
Hey, sorry about that, guys. Can you hear me? Yeah, I got cut off. I'm back. Okay. I'm back. Had a little power failure there.
So, from what I read in that article, one of the things that concerned me, it talked about when all this money starts getting thrown around, basically your rich schools are going to be on a different level. And then you're going to have the rest of your schools, below that level, if you will. And I say that level, so I'm sure people are thinking, what level are you talking about? But it was my understanding that it was going to be like a division. There was going to be a division because you had all these schools that had tons of money that could afford to take good care of all their programs and the educational part of it as well, that 30 grand for each player. But then, schools like West Virginia, for example, would have a difficult time, because they were going to set their rules. They were going to allow them to set their own rules as far as rosters, how many people they had on their rosters, how many scholarships, whatever the case may be. They were going to let them set their own rules since they were spending their own money. And that was going to really hurt the schools that, weren't these big rich schools like Michigan, Ohio State, Notre Dame. So it was going to be kind of divided. It was going to be a division of sorts. And I really didn't understand it. I'd like to ask some questions more about that. I don't think any of us fully understand it just yet, but I don't really see that proposal, going anywhere. I think Frank, you and I and Mickey talked before we got on the air. It's just the NCAA, now trying to, get the horse back in the barn after they sat back and let this NIL thing unfold without any guidance and no legislation at all. And now they're trying to reel it back in because they see, these conference alignments and these people switching conferences. They see what's coming, and that is there's going to be these super conferences, and the NCAA is going to be out of the picture because they don't need them, and they're going to have their own governing bodies. And I think they're trying to save themselves by coming up with this idea, and that's why I don't think it's going to go anywhere. Mickey, I don't know if you're familiar with what we're talking about, but we're talking about the new proposal by the NCAA to have the schools pay their own basically NIL, and then make them put so much money into the educational part of it. So I don't know if you're familiar what your opinion is on that, but go ahead and chime in there.
Well, I read that article briefly. I make a separation between what an educational institution exists for and its athletic program. I don't see how an educational institution should be required or should even consider contributing to paying athletes for play when at the same time they have a budget shortfall and they're cutting faculty and staff. In my alma mater's case, to the tune of $45 million. So if the athletic program can earn the kind of money that it needs to earn to survive on its own, I'm still really at heart not in favor of pay for play. To me, it strikes at the very heart of amateurism. It's like back in the day in the Olympics when Jim Thorpe, they took away all his gold medals in the Olympics because he'd done a commercial for somebody and earned like $700. There's amateur level sports and there's professional level sports. I think the portal and NIL has destroyed the moral integrity of the game at the collegiate level. It's my own personal opinion. By the same token, I think there should be a system in which college athletes are compensated in some manner for the time. I got a free scholarship. I got a free education at WVU. And Charlie knows this. I think we all sit down one time and calculated the number of hours that we spent in the winter workout program, working out in summer on our own, fall practice, the weightlifting program, and the actual season. It ended up, back in the day, we were paid 75 cents an hour. That's how much our scholarship was worth for the hours that we put in. I'm thankful to have had it. I'm thankful to have had it. We did get a stipend of $20 a month that we all joke about back in the day. And that was because the training table where we all ate our meals was closed on Sunday nights. So we got $20 a month, and that was to be spent $5 every Sunday to get your Sunday dinner because the training table was closed on that day. But once money gets entered into the picture, and we all see this, I mean, it's becoming all about TV ad revenues. the reason you have to have an SEC team in those Final Four is purely monetary. No other reason, in my estimation, on why you have to have an SEC team in there. The reason the Pac-12 is broken up completely is all because of people just going after the almighty dollar instead of enjoying the pure amateurism of the athletes at that level. My solution to this whole problem would be to do the same thing that the National Major League and American League baseball teams do. You develop a farm club system, A, AA, and AAA, with various size colleges, and you pay those people at those different levels because they're developing the athletes that are going to play for you professionally once they get out of the amateur competition level. That's my solution over the long haul. That would work just like I think the NFL should establish a farm club system just like they have in Major League Baseball.
Well, I think, I think we all agree that we don't, any college fan, I don't think likes the NIL, the way it's unfolding. I don't think any of us like that, but it's here and it's not going anywhere. And I think they've got to start looking for some solutions to the free for all that it's turned into. I've suggested all along that they just simply make them sign contracts. And somebody, well, that makes a professional football. Well, that's what it is anyway. They're getting paid to play. And you can say what you want to say. They're getting paid to play. And even the coaches are now just coming out and saying it. It's going to cost you $1-2 million to have a good quarterback. So, make them sign a contract. We'll give you this much money if you complete, 3 years for us, whatever the contract says. To me, that's the only way they're going to be able to rein it in just a little bit. Charlie, what's your thoughts on it?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because my phone went dead, so I went back on my iPad.
There you go.
There's not much I can add to that. There's a question I'd like to ask Frank. He might know, and it might be a question that other people have thought about. We have the portal, and we know it's highly used by the coaches. Do you think that there is a great number of kids coming out of high school that now do not get scholarship offers because those scholarships are now being filled by the portal?
That's a good question. I mean, that's a researchable question. There is an answer. I don't know the answer, but the consequences, I mean, one thing we know for sure is that, and the data are clear on this. In fact, you look at a wide receiver that West Virginia is after from Georgia State. There are a lot of players that did not get offers from Power 5 teams, or they weren't very attractive offers. And so they ended up at Group of 5 schools or less, like a Georgia State, who are now having an opportunity after they show what they can do on the field to possibly migrate, and many are, to Power 5. So we know that.
That's my point.
Yeah. So the question is, to what extent do we have folks coming out of high school who otherwise would have gotten a scholarship offer who aren't? It makes a lot of sense. I mean, again, Greg, the beautiful thing about this is that it's too easy to look at any issue that we have today through the eyes of today because we're living through it. So The nice thing about having legacy players is that they can compare their own experience back then to the circumstance of today, and you get perspectives that otherwise you would not get. For example, I get a lot of people who tell me, okay, you old fuddy-duddy, just get with it. The nil is here. If Ohio State wants to raise $20 billion next year, let them. It's called capitalism, buddy. And that's certainly a legitimate perspective because the system actually is designed that way. The more money, the more money, the more money. A&M and Texas and Ohio State are 3 examples of those. But there are other people who say, like Mickey said a few minutes ago, well, what's a higher education institution about? And how does this all fit together? And so, we can't deny the politics, but all of this is interesting. In fact, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, Charlie. Anytime a question comes up, and it's researchable, I'll go after it because I think that's an important question.
Yeah.
Every time there's an action, there's a consequence. There's a
because for an example, Morehead State College, they don't per se give scholarships. They might give your books to you, or you might get one semester, but you don't. There's no full scholarships at a lot of schools like that. So those kids coming out of high schools that might have been recruited but are not because that position has been filled by a portal transfer. I was just kind of curious about that.
Good question, Trey.
And Mickey,
Good question.
Mickey, I don't know how much you worked out in the summer, but I didn't start until about a week and a half before practice.
Well, I didn't either. And Phil Calcutt, as a matter of fact, used to come down to the pool hall in Mount Hope, West Virginia, to make sure that I was working out. And he went back and reported directly to Jim Carlin. And let me just say the reports weren't very good.
I bet Charlie still has that $20 a month he got. He's probably still got that stash somewhere.
Oh, no. Mine didn't go for Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Curious, I bet you didn't need it. Yeah, I bet you didn't need it. That's for sure.
Yeah. Greg, we're going to have to sign off here tonight. Just in a few minutes. We got some good news. People, I mentioned earlier, there's a basketball game at 9 o'clock. ESPN
that's right.
2 against Pitt. And look at this. I don't think you know this guy, Greg. His name is David Gorby. Have you ever heard that name before?
I've heard it a time or two. Yeah.
They're partners on the New River Network. But isn't this great news for the basketball team?
Absolutely. Yeah, we need that. We need any bench we can get. So,
say that again.
Before we do sign off, I want to remind folks who are listening or who will be listening, make sure when you're on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe to our page, our show. That helps us a great deal. So please do that. Make sure when you get on, like and subscribe. And it doesn't cost you anything to do that. So don't worry, you're not paying them for a subscription. You just hit the button. So make sure you do that. Well, guys, I tell you what, this was a lot of fun, and I knew it would be. And Charlie and Mickey, God bless you guys. So much fun to listen to you all talk about these great memories. I absolutely love it, and it has really been a great thing in my life to get to know you guys and get to hear these stories personally and talk to you personally. It's always a lot of fun. Frank, great job as always. You handled the technology end of it very well. I didn't see one glitch. The only glitch I could see was the dogs in the background. My neighbor's dogs kept barking for the show. I'll have to relocate next time. Get somewhere. Maybe go to the bathroom. Close the door.
It's a blessing that we're spending time with our fans. We really appreciate you watching tonight, and we're going to keep this bowl focus going. Bowls, the bowl coming up, but also bowls of the past. And I'm thinking, based on the conversation about Pat White, that 2008 bowl game, that was a 32-31 West Virginia win over North Carolina, might be a good one to talk about next week. Get some of the players from that game with us, so we get the legends perspective as well.
That's right. Yep. So that's what we'll be talking about next week. Will be the Duke's Mayo Bowl, and then we'll look back at a bowl in the past. And like Frank said, that'd be a good one to look at. Mickey, any final thoughts?
Well, I just want to make a suggestion here in closing. The Peach State chapter of the WVU Alumni Association here in Atlanta, every time we have a bowl game, we would plan some special activities for anybody coming in from out of town. So for next week's guest, I can help you guys get in touch with the president of the Charlotte WVU Alumni Association, maybe try to get him on as a guest, because I'm sure that they'll have some special activities planned around the bowl game. We should definitely try to get him on the program next week.
Definitely before the bowl game comes. We'll try to do that for sure. Charlie, anything you'd like to finish up with?
Just thank you guys. Thank our fans. We got the greatest fans in the country. We honestly do. Even those ones that I have a hard time with on Facebook every week, I love you, even though you can't saying what I had to say.
Even the
Thank you,
social media.
Frank. Thank you, Coach. Thank you, Mick. God bless. And if I don't speak with you all, Merry Christmas.
Same to you, and same that to all our listeners. We appreciate everybody tuning in tonight. For Frank, I'm Greg Christ. You've been watching the Mountaineer Locker Room Then and Now, and we hope you'll join us again next week, Wednesday, 7 p.m. We'll be back here with more gibberish. So hope you'll join us then.
All right. See you guys.